my daughter in the past. They just don't understand Asperger's.
I feel very sad. It's like I'm going to be losing part of my family.
I say Kirklees Council, pay attention to autistic individuals, listen to what they need instead of telling them.
Can feel a little bit like a lost feeling, and like I said, it's no idea what to do.
It's a very, very sad day for us today. We've built up, really good relationships.
In the carers strategy for Kirklees, and like everybody else that we've dealt with in Kirklees.
But nobody knows anything about it really, or how to help anybody with autism, even though it's their job.
I suppose progression in a very, very simple process is usually looked at in two different ways. One is an individual developing independent life skills, and second is an individual progressing on to perhaps employment. Although individuals themselves may well have targets or goals that they will set themselves, and that might range from being able to develop small talk, for example, or being more confident in social situations, perhaps to develop relationships or friendships. So usually the outcome of employment is a very popular one, both for our service users but also for outside funders, which is why we're currently working with the Department of Works and Pension on a scheme to look at progressing individuals onto employment, because I think it's around 15% of people on the autistic spectrum are in employment, which is one of the lowest within any disability group.
We have an Autism and Asperger Strategy Steering Group, that's Kirklees strategy, in a couple of weeks' time. I intend to raise this whole issue at that steering group and basically ask Kirklees what provision they are now going to make, either as a collective whole or by looking again at the funding rules, which of course because the problem really is that the funding rules don't work for people with Asperger's and autism. They're configured around people with more physical disabilities, people with geriatric disabilities, but they really don't fit with people with Asperger's. If we can make them fit with people with Asperger's, then the provision will be made.
Well, it's a bit of a mixture really. Because I'm still single and unemployed, I've been considering my future for the services, but it's come as a bit of a shock when the directors came in that they were shutting the site down. It's like a bomb that exploded, like a bombshell.
I think the impact of our closure long term is going to be that almost like people taking a knock in confidence to be able to think, right, how can I find another service which replicates the development of trust, the development of skills, but also has that understanding of the impact of the condition. I'll give you an example of that. One of the things we do here is support individuals when they are looking to apply for benefits, and that may be employment and support allowance, it may be disability living allowance, and we supported an individual for his ESA, employment and support allowance, and at the tribunal they were asked how they would feel if the appointment for that tribunal had been cancelled at the last minute. Big change at the last minute. And he admitted about how he would find that very, very difficult to have dealt with. And the subsequent question was to ask how would he feel if our support worker had not been there or had failed to appear or had cancelled an appointment. And what's quite interesting, the answer from the individual was, that's never happened. And that is one of the biggest areas of impact is that lack of continuity that the people that we work with are going to feel. Because quite often other organisations, they will have quite a large number of staff. Sometimes they will feel as if, wait a minute, I'm just being shunted round from place to place. So I think overall it's going to be how can that individual maintain the levels of confidence that they develop while they've been here? How can they maintain that level of communication, that level of ability that they've built up slowly since they've been here, and how they can maintain that? And that's going to be the biggest gap.
The impact on Samantha, if she didn't have SAS, in some ways is very similar to us. Because what I was saying just now was really the affirmation that we had that we were dealing with something that wasn't being made up in our heads. I mean, just her involvement with you today has just been so positive. I mean, she was terrified of coming in and talking to camera, but she's now done it, and just the confidence that she's been gaining from her involvement here has been massive, and she doesn't have anywhere else that she gets that. Even at home, she's having to juggle stuff with a 2.5-year-old son, her partner, and their friends. And because of her Asperger's, she's always been the one who's been marginalised. Here, she is valued, she is important, and outside our family, she's never had it.
What next for me? My son isn't anymore a teenager, he's a young adult. We've lived with this for a long time and we know how to deal with it. What we've got to do is basically seek ways of making the provision that we're now losing. But of course, myself and my wife are not getting any younger, and all the time it becomes more difficult for us as a family to actually help Jamie, and in due course, of course, we won't be able to, because quite simply we won't be here. So I think that's something that's got to be thought about quite a bit.
Just disappointed and a little bit lost. So where do we go from here? The other services that I've looked into aren't really adequate for my needs, really. So it's just a little bit confused, a little bit like a lost feeling, and like I said, it's no idea what to do, where to turn.
Without something like this, I really don't have much reason to get up in the morning. So I've got to find something that's worth getting up for, and it's going to be hard to find something like that, because I think going straight into employment will be very hard for someone like me, and I just don't know really what to do next. I don't know what's coming next. I mean, the SACA have done their best to help me find alternatives, and there might be some immediate alternatives on the road ahead where I can see some of the people from here again, so that kind of lessens the loss a bit, but there's still the fact that it won't be the same. It won't be.
To see more awareness, people think that we can that we need. It depends on what we want, really, to answer our needs, whatever they may be. Because people have different needs, after all. One person needs this, another person needs that, and no matter what they may be, to have our needs answered.
In terms of what else may happen after this, like I said, one of the big difficulties is how people fall through that gap of learning disabilities and mental health, and quite often what's known as FACS eligible, that's FACS, which is free access to care, they don't necessarily fulfil a lot of criteria. They still may have a need. The need may be there because it's about aiding that individual's communication, aiding that individual's development of coping strategies for the impact of Asperger's. But because people have been, or that need has sometimes failed to have been recognised, it's very, very difficult. I mean, in terms of trying to continue here, what we're going to be doing as a small group here, we'll be visiting a social group which is run in Calderdale, for example, which runs in Halifax. And even if something like that was replicated here, it would be hugely beneficial, really, really beneficial. Again, that sense of continuity, that sense of being able to speak and interact with other people on the autistic spectrum, to share experiences, to develop coping strategies, to talk about how people have felt about the impact of the condition. Something like that would be brilliant, and hopefully, because it's relatively cheap, it should be something which should be instigated by the council, to hopefully replicate what they've got over at Calderdale.
Well, what we'll have to do is we have to find out what alternatives there are. They won't be as good, but we'll have to do that. What we also want to do is to try discuss with Kirklees Council what can be done to rectify the situation by providing proper Asperger's provision in Kirklees. That is essential, but of course it isn't going to be achieved overnight. In a couple of weeks' time, it's going to perhaps take a little while to get there.
About them closing it, I'm not happy one bit. Because at first I was undecided, and now we're getting to the end of a long period group since about 5 years ago. I think that they're wrong to close it down.
I think one of the difficulties with Asperger's is around how an individual on first contact may appear so able, and you just go, I don't understand where this individual requires support. They're well turned out, they're very polite, they're holding down a job. I don't know where the support is, or support may be required, and maybe that's the crux to it, because the individual, appears so able, appears so gifted sometimes in particular areas, and you just think, right, I don't understand why this person may need support. And it's only once you get to know that person after a period of time that their needs may fully reveal or manifest themselves.
When I was diagnosed with autism, I was about 20 when I was diagnosed. I was assigned a social worker who, when I was diagnosed, I was referred to SACA by a lady in the job centre, and I attended SACA every week, and then the social worker I was assigned to asked if I would consider going to a different service instead of SACA, because the other service was offering a cheaper, didn't want as much funding, Bridgewood, and they didn't want to pay for SACA because the Bridgewood was about half cost. So I gave it a try. I went to Bridgewood. According to the social worker, it'd be perfect for me. I could go do some gardening over there with them, and I'd fit right in. But when I joined, it just showed that the social worker really didn't understand anything about autism, even though she was sort of in charge of, what I do and where I go, and so there was just no training. Mustn't have been any training on her part, and it was really difficult attending the service. And this service is it's the only alternative I've seen other than SACA, but it just wasn't possible at all. The staff had no idea how to approach somebody with autism or Asperger's, and even though I attended the service for nearly a year, I think, and I managed to get the staff sort of trained up myself, which was difficult on my bit because I was trying to do an autism awareness course sort of to the staff what was supposed to be supporting me, but I sort of needed an anti-autism awareness course because I didn't know what it was like not to be autistic, so I didn't, it was very difficult, but eventually I managed to get the staff so we had some sort of understanding. But then even after all of that, I still couldn't do anything with the other service users that were there, who were all mainly learning difficulties. They're very, very opposite to people with autism. They tend to be a lot louder, and people with autism have sensory issues, so, people who are too loud. So, it just doesn't mix. It's like trying to put a dog with a cat, what are used to each other. They don't get on at all, and so it was just very unpleasant trying to cope with all these sensory problems I had, and it just went to show that other than SACA, there is no other service that I could attend, because that was supposed to be it, and it just wasn't. I'd have been better off staying at home, staying in my bedroom, So there is no other service other than SACA, and the social workers have proven themselves that they're not trained to deal with people on the spectrum, and something needs to be done about it, because everybody knows autism exists, but nobody knows anything about it really, or how to help anybody with autism, even though it's their job.
I'm really upset for the members. I've worked in Kirklees for I think nearly 2 years now, and I also run an art workshop on a Thursday, and the group's just bonded. They're working really well together, so it's a real shame to work with a group from the very beginning, see them develop relationships and get on really well, and then for it to be taken away when they're feeling comfortable and really achieving. It's really disappointing for me. It's a real shame.
When I've heard about a month ago now about them doing a closure on the Specialist Autism Services here in Huddersfield, I wanted to do my part to show that I'm a member and help the other members out. So I went into Kirklees Council offices and asked where do I get a petition from. So they sent me around a few places, and I went to the right place in town, and then they said, right, we'll give you a few sheets, and then write down on it what you want to petition about. And what I asked them, I said, Kirklees councils have withdrawn funding from Specialist Autism Services from the 29th of May, and what I asked them to do is, we would like for councillors to take note of the group views alongside members of the public and seek alternative funding or assist to find alternative funding.
The big difficulty around assessment of adults on the autistic spectrum, particularly those with Asperger's, is that the condition, as I mentioned earlier, two of the main areas that the condition impacts is around communication and social interaction. And the odd thing is, the only thing we ever ask people on the autistic spectrum to do is to communicate and socially interact. You wouldn't do that with any other disability. If you had someone with mobility issues, you continually wouldn't ask them to climb a spiral staircase. And so when it comes to assessment, if that individual does not, or the person doing the assessment rather, doesn't necessarily take into account the communication and the social interaction needs of that person during that assessment, that person is disadvantaged, they're hamstrung from the beginning. If you had someone who was visually impaired, there would be a way for those questions or that paperwork to be interpreted. It may be a spoken question, it may be in Braille. The same as if someone was hearing impaired, you would be able to do it different ways, by visual, or you will be able to do it perhaps through board mark or something, or something like that. But those concessions, those adaptability processes when it comes to someone on the autistic spectrum aren't there. And if they're not there, then usually what a person will do, because there is that anxiety around a social interaction, particularly if it's around a person from social services they've never met before, the easiest way for that person to get out of that social situation is just to give the shortest answer. Do you need any support around the house? No, I don't. Because that social situation they're then able to escape from. And that is the prime difficulty.
Let me give you an example. A lot of the rules about funding, and I do recognise that Kirklees is having to look very carefully at how it funds and only funds the most needy. But they very often can figure out things like, can you wash yourself? Can you walk a certain distance? And of course, people with Asperger's don't fit into those rules. The answer is, yes, a person with Asperger's can wash themselves and they can walk, but their disability is very different. And the funding rules, the boxes you have to tick to get funding, don't take account of the sort of problems that people with Asperger's face.
I mean, in terms of the assessment criteria, I understand, there's the need for that, not necessarily to advantage or disadvantage one group over another. But I think if people were trained and more aware of the communication needs of someone on the autistic spectrum when it came to answering those questions, it would be an awful lot easier. Maybe they may have a truer picture of the needs of that person. April 2nd this year, which is World Autism Day, they published the second part of the National Autism Strategy, which is called Think Autism. And it's great that there's all this going on, but it needs to be reflected at the sharp end in terms of delivery of service or funding of service, really.
As like Linda and Abigail says, it's a very, very sad day for us today. We've built up, really good relationships, and you've seen the progression of how members, when I started 12 months ago, to now. I mean, ideally, obviously, we would like Kirklees to kind of reverse the decision, and that would be, the ultimate outcome, I suppose, of that. That would be great for the members and for us. It's like Linda says, we are kind of losing the families, no longer. It's very, very sad.